Creating an environment that supports people to be the healthiest they can be is really important. When it comes to preventing skin cancer, the best thing we can do in the environment is providing shade so that people can get relief from UV if they find themselves caught when UV starts to get above 3.
We have our slip, slop, slap, seek and slide message, and out of those 5 things, only one relates to something that's not personal choice, which is shade. It's good for so many reasons. It's good for our mental health, our physical health, our social connection. It's good for the economics. It's good for climate change and microclimate management. And it's good for UV protection.
It most importantly is a cooling agent. And when you have a cooler environment, it's a more manageable space. It's more livable. It's critical that we understand the importance of shade when designing for the future of any human settlements.
When we're looking at shade, we think of it as natural shade, so that's trees and vegetation. Buildings, they do provide shadow and shade, and the third component is what we call introduced or structured shade, where we're adding shade structures, shade sails. So when we talk about 70 or 75% coverage, what we're really talking about is a combination of those 3 elements. Our urban centres, our cities, actually in most cases have a declining tree canopy coverage, and some suburbs only have 10% coverage. It's a co-benefit. I mean, they're improving environmental quality, they improve the microclimate around your house in the local community. It's a no-brainer from my point of view.
Some of the most effective prevention measures that we can put in place are the ones that we don't need to think about, ones that we don't need to plan for. Almost set and forget. The trees are there for a long period of time and they continue to provide that shade benefit. And that's a really cost-effective form of providing long-term protection for people.
You kind of have to prove everything, that even the obvious things. One of the interventions that we tried at the Cancer Council was to get primary schools to put up shade sails in the playgrounds, and the total exposure was less than the schools that didn't have it because the kids would go under the shade.
At the moment, recent research by the Cancer Institute indicates that 20% of our playgrounds have no shade. Only 15% have what we would consider 50% shade. About 50% would not even deliver an acceptable level of shade. It infuriates me really. Designers, administrators, managers of our public spaces have a duty of care.
Availability of shade, we know when it's there, people use it. There is such a greater need for shade in public spaces. It's a huge unmet need. There are multiple levels of thinking about design of built shade and natural shade and combinations of that, which can really help in just making outdoor spaces more aesthetically pleasing, more attractive, and obviously more safe.
We know when you develop a new public space, whether it's a sporting stadium or a beach foreshore development, there's actually no requirement for them to have a minimum amount of shade. Having those minimum standards and minimum percentage of shade would really increase and incentivise the planners, the local governments, the developers to include that from day one. The public is genuinely baffled by why this isn't happening. They do come to us and say, we can't believe that there is no shade. We also hear from local governments and state governments who realise that putting that shade in retrospectively is inconvenient, it's expensive, and there's a lot more hoops to jump through.
I think there's 2 aspects to this. I think there's a personal responsibility, and that requires education and incentive for people to understand the risk and take appropriate action to prevent that risk. Equally, I think there's a responsibility of government and developers to provide shade infrastructure, which the average person can't do. I think it's a fundamental right that every citizen should have access to shade.